You need to help me. I need to go back to her.
With great gems such as Masters of the Air and Silo, Apple TV Plus has become a benchmark in TV shows in a short time, competing directly with streaming giants such as Netflix, HBO, and Disney Plus. However, one TV show from this year has gone a little unnoticed. We are talking about Constellation, a sci-fi story that will leave you wondering if you are in the right universe. Set in northern Sweden, the series begins with Jo Eriksson, an astronaut driving through the snowy forest with her young daughter Alice, who keeps asking about her father's whereabouts. The woman refuses to answer and arrives at their destination, a lonely cabin where they will spend the night. Soon, Jo hears her daughter screaming in the middle of the woods, even though she is sleeping peacefully in the cabin. So who's screaming? 5 weeks earlier, the protagonist's life was quite normal. While her daughter Alicia and her husband Magnus live in Germany, she resides at the International Space Station, ISS, as an astronaut for the European Space Agency, ESA. From space, she communicates with her daughter and shows the progress of her team, especially the experiment of Paul Lancaster, a NASA astronaut with the Cold Atom Laboratory. This project is headed by Henry Caldera, chief scientist at the Rocket Propulsion Laboratory in Pasadena, and his purpose is to discover a new state of matter. Just as Paul activates CAL, an unknown object hits the space station. All the astronauts suffer damage, but Paul takes the brunt of it. As soon as the station is stabilized, the crew members try to save their injured crewmate, but it's too late. Jo then performs a spacewalk to assess the damage. She discovers that the life support was damaged and is beyond repair. Therefore, they must return to Earth in the only operational Soyuz module. The problem is that it can only carry 3 people. Following the clues to the crash, Jo stumbles upon the object that hit them, a desiccated female corpse in a USSR spacesuit. Jo then decides to stay at the station to repair the Soyuz 1 module, while her crewmates board Soyuz 2 and head for Earth. All ESA astronauts have returned from their space missions, but there is a possibility that Jo may become the exception, a possibility that worries her family. Since electrical power is limited, Jo spends a few minutes in the dark without any communication with Earth. Her only companion is Paul's corpse. She is supposed to wait 45 minutes for the power to return, though her watch speeds up and the power is restored. With no time to solve mysteries, Jo focuses on repairing Soyuz 1 with parts from the station. Seeing a drawing of the dead USSR astronaut, Roscosmos flight leader Irina Lysenko allows the CAL Data Core recovery plan. Despite the incident, Henry insists that the experiment was a success. During the hour of darkness, Jo experiences another strange occurrence, a hallucination in which she sees a cupboard with her daughter's necklace, and there appears to be someone inside. Before she could open it, she suddenly returns to the ship. This connects to the opening scene in the woods, when Jo investigates the source of the scream and ends up in a ruined cabin exactly like her own. Moving through the corridors, she finds a cupboard where a nearly frozen Alice is hiding, asking her why it took her so long to return. Right away, Jo takes her to the other cabin where the girl asks her if she is a ghost. While caring for Alice, the woman discovers that the other Alice is still sleeping. As soon as the woman turns to the sick Alice, she can't find her anywhere and begins to distrust her other daughter. Back on the ISS, Jo realizes that she passed out and lost hours of work. Also, she can't communicate with the Mission Control Center. Still, she manages to continue repairs on her own. Aware of this, Frederick, the ESA director, warns Magnus that his wife must calculate the deorbit parameters without any help, an almost impossible task. Magnus and Alice were taken to the Roscosmos Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan to welcome Jo, but it now looks like they will receive only bad news. In the middle of her work, the protagonist thinks she hears Paul's voice. When she approaches his body, she realizes he has moved out of place. From Earth, Alice is sure that her mother will calculate the parameters of deorbit and has full confidence in her intelligence. She is not wrong because the astronaut, beyond her hallucinations and lack of communication, sets some parameters with her own deductive capacity and hopes for the best. With the CL core in her possession, she enters Soyuz 1 and records a message for her family in case things go wrong. With only 12 minutes left before the oxygen runs out, Joe prepares to undock the module from the space station. Unfortunately, a complication arises with the latch system, and it can only be repaired from the outside with 2 crew members. As the oxygen counter comes to an end, the scientists on Earth mourn Joe's presumed death. Just then, the malfunction in the latch system is mysteriously fixed. While traveling in the module, Joe sees a mysterious figure peering out of a window of the ISS. Thanks to her deorbit parameters, the woman enters Earth's atmosphere and regains contact with mission control. Immediately, a massive search operation is deployed to find the astronaut's landing site. Finally, she gets to see her family again. And even though things weren't going well with Magnus, she now embraces him more lovingly than ever. At the same time, Henry retrieves the CAL data core, where new matter has formed. Seconds after boarding the helicopter, Alice witnesses how her mother and everyone around her disappear from one moment to the next. In another dimension, Joe experiences the exact same thing until both realities merge again. Returning to the present, Joe takes the data core and, with the help of her daughter, sets out to find her other daughter again. I know, nothing makes sense, but soon it will, I think. After a long walk, Joe concludes that this Alice is not her real daughter. We jump back into the past when Magnus and Alice sense that Joe has changed since returning from space. This becomes more apparent when she refers to Paul's wife and daughter by the wrong names. Likewise, she remembers the ISS incident differently, and her own companions do not agree with her version of events. Moreover, no one believes her story of the dead USSR astronaut since, just at that moment, her camera broke down and the corpse floated off into space. According to Irina, there have been no cosmonaut deaths above the Kármán line. Therefore, the old woman believes that Joe was suffering from hypoxia during her time on the ISS, which explains her hallucinations and fuzzy memories. Despite Joe's claim that she did not suffer from hypoxia, she is forced to take daily pills that are supposedly vitamins. During her recovery, she again hallucinates about the cupboard and her daughter's necklace. Meanwhile, Henry struggles to prove that the CAL core was able to create new matter. For some reason, the core only replicates the effect observed on the ISS when Henry is alone. Unfortunately, the experiment is also not visible in a photograph. Faced with this phenomenon, he believes it is the observer effect, a quantum theory that he explains to Alice. The same particle can be in 2 different states at the same time. There is a world in which the particle is black and another in which the particle is white. In between those 2 worlds, there is a liminal space where the particle is both black and white at the same time. The problem is that they don't want to decide what color they will be until someone sees them. Henry discovered something that doesn't want to be seen. Later, Joe identifies the USSR suit she saw as the same type worn by Irina in the 1960s. However, after seeing Paul's ghost, she withdraws the claim about the dead USSR astronaut, ending the bureaucratic imbroglio between the various space agencies. Thanks to that, she can finally return home with her family. On the other hand, we meet Henry's twin brother, Bud Caldera, a retired astronaut who participated in the failed Apollo 18, a space mission in which 2 astronauts died. Since his retirement, Bud has no choice but to profit from his stories. At a convention aboard a cruise ship, author Ian Rogers points out that there are gaps between his story and the official report of the Apollo 18 tragedy. Later, an inebriated Bud blames Henry for the Apollo 18 disaster, but Ian has no idea who Henry is and continues to call him a fraud. Furious, Bud pushes him overboard. The next day, the old man discovers that the FBI is investigating Ian's mysterious death. While Magnus is happy to have Joe back home, he feels she has changed too much, especially since they were about to divorce before her space travel. Surprisingly, she doesn't even remember that they were fighting and denies accusations that she was having an affair with Frederick. Magnus was so sure of these rumors that he started dating another woman, believing Joe would break up with him upon returning to Earth. Joe is outraged just to hear this and reaffirms her love for her husband. Due to the gaps in her memories, Jo goes to a therapist who recommends taking lithium. The only person who backs up Jo's story is Henry, who, as a veteran astronaut, tells her about cosmonauts who heard and saw strange things in space. At night, Jo breaks into ESA headquarters and, through an experiment, discovers that the vitamins were never that, but lithium pills that were secretly prescribed to astronauts who saw unexplained phenomena in space. Suddenly, a couple of cleaners enter the office but don't notice the woman's presence, because she's in another dimension. The next day, during a class at Alice's school, Jo sees her husband talking to the teacher and asks him in front of everyone if she is his mistress. When Magnus goes to Frederick to deal with his wife's mental condition, he also forces him to tell the truth about his affair with her. After an argument with her husband, Jo finds a package sent by the Skagerrak Marine Observatory containing her audio recordings on the ISS after she lost contact with the mission control. At the same time, Alice slips into another reality and ends up at her mother's funeral. After seeing Paul alive and her double, the girl returns to her reality. During her panic attack, Jo keeps asking what she saw, so Magnus takes his daughter away and leaves her in the cupboard, a place he likes to hide when afraid. This time, she's afraid of her own mother. Magnus therefore tries to force his wife to take the pills, ignoring the warning that they are made of lithium. This leads to a struggle in which Jo pushes her husband, and he falls unconscious. Faced with this situation, she calls an ambulance and flees the house with Alice. Soon after, Jo sneaks into ESA headquarters and steals the CAL data core, as all the weird stuff started with the activation of that device. On the way to Denmark, the woman calls her colleague Andrav and confirms the theory that she alone was receiving lithium pills to deal with her alleged mental delusions. Also, Mission Control heard her words in space even though she believed she lost complete communication. Someone wants to silence her. Later, Alice confesses to her mother that she has been seeing a ghostly figure she calls the Valya. As the girl is very reserved, Jo suggests that they both draw their fears. While she calls her husband to check on him, her daughter shows her drawing. The Valya is the dead USSR astronaut, and no one besides Jo is supposed to have seen it. Arriving at the Skagerrak Marine Observatory, Jo meets the siblings who own the property, Wahlberg and Lawrence Bang. As ham radio operators, the siblings for decades have been picking up signals from astronauts in space and recording audios of their deaths. Lorenz teaches them about the process of picking up signals and tells that during the Apollo 18 disaster, they heard an unexplained sound. They believe that NASA and the agencies involved heard the same thing, only they kept quiet and discredited the bangs so they would not be taken seriously by the cosmonaut community. Among his huge collection of tapes, Lorenz has one of a young USSR astronaut who disappeared in space in 1967, but according to the official version, she returned safely to Earth. She could be the Valya. Fearing hospitalization if she returns to Germany, Jo decides to go to her cabin in northern Sweden with her daughter. On the way, Alice listens more closely to the tape of the USSR cosmonaut and recognizes that she has the same voice as the Valya of her visions. Once at the cabin, Jo listens to the recording of her video call with her daughter seconds before the ISS accident. Suddenly, a startled Alice mentions that she does not speak Swedish as she does in the video call. At the same time, in another universe, Alice searches for her mother in the middle of a snowstorm and screams for her. On the other hand, it is revealed that Henry and Bud are not twin brothers, but different individuals existing in different universes. Still, they are aware of each other's existence and can communicate with each other. They've been in that dynamic for years, but lately their consciousnesses are blending, so Henry believes it's due to Kial activation. Bud cares little for his theory and warns that it's going to ruin his life because of what happened on Apollo 18. We jump to another reality to see the beginning of the story from another perspective. In this universe, Paul survives the ISS crash, and Jo dies in his place. Contrary to what we saw, Paul's family now comforts Magnus and Alice. Faced with the loss of her mother, the girl takes refuge in a cupboard and repeatedly knocks on the door. Suddenly, a woman with a flashlight approaches her position. As Alice steps out of the cupboard, the woman disappears. Meanwhile, the astronaut stays on the ISS to repair the Soyuz 1 module, while his colleagues return to Earth. During his work, he suffers hallucinations and believes Joe's corpse is breathing. Frightened, he decides to leave the body on the station. Ready to lift off in the Soyuz, Paul is confronted with an error in the latch system that can only be fixed from the outside. But the error is mysteriously fixed, and he sees a dark figure watching him from the ISS. Back on Earth, Paul leaves a flower on Joe's memorial. For a few seconds, he sees her doing the same thing in another reality. Also, he has hallucinations of his own funeral and fails to connect with his family. But what disturbs him the most is that everyone denies the existence of the CEL, which does not appear in the station's recordings. In his investigation of Apollo 18, Paul notices Henry and remembers him as the creator of Kiel. However, his superiors at NASA point out that he is confusing the name, as the commander of Apollo 18 was Bud. During Joe's funeral, Alice hides in the cupboard, refusing to believe that her mother is dead as her body is still in space. This theory is reinforced by Paul himself, who regrets leaving Joe's body behind and believes she might be alive. As soon as he says that Paul and Alice see the Alice of the universe, where Joe is alive. Disturbed by the vision, the girl tells her father that she wants to go to her cabin in Sweden. As for Paul, he visits Bud for answers and discovers that in this reality there were 2 dead in the Apollo 18 disaster, while in the original universe, Henry was able to save the astronauts. Tired of Paul referring to him as Henry, Bud shoots him with his gun. At the cabin, the girl insists that they must wait for her mother, so her father painfully reminds her that Joe is dead. Soon after, while Magnus sleeps, Alice sees her mother arrive at the cabin. As soon as the girl comes out, Joe disappears again. She then decides to go into the forest in search of her mother. This takes us back to the original universe, where Alice recognizes that her mother is not exactly her mother, at least not as she remembered her. In the other reality, Alice arrives at the same cabin, only this one is ruined. So she enters the cupboard to protect herself from the cold. Suddenly, the wind blocks the door. Attracted by her screams, Joe arrives on the scene and pulls her out of the cupboard, a scene we already saw. While caring for her in the cabin, the woman realizes that this is her right daughter. However, as soon as Joe sees her other daughter, Alice returns to her universe and awakens her father. When he falls asleep again, Alice returns to the forest in search of her mother again. At the same time, the Joe from the other universe comes out to look for her and argues with the wrong Alice, who drops the Kiel and runs away. The Alice from the other universe bumps into the Kiel on the way. Finally, both Alices arrive at the ruined cabin and discover that they can communicate through a recording device. Both hide in the cupboard, while their parents, each in a different universe, try to find them, but all they find is the recording device. When the Alices try to see themselves through a mirror, they end up trapped in the cupboard. Upon hearing this, Joe immediately goes out to save her daughter and stumbles upon a lamp, which starts the cabin on fire. At the same time, the Magnus of the original universe arrives in the woods along with Henry, Frederick, and the authorities. In their conversation, the Alices conclude that Joe is in the wrong universe. When she becomes aware of the fire, Joe turns around and returns to the cabin. While it appears to be burning on the outside, inside it is already in ruins. There, she finds her wrong daughter, who offers herself as the conduit between her and the right Alice. All was going well until the flames appeared, so Joe gets the wrong Alice out of the cabin. Suddenly, Henry's memories begin to mix with Bud's, leading him to find the lost CL in the snow. That way, he switches bodies with Bud right after he shot Paul. He immediately calls 911 to help the astronaut. While Joe tries to revive the wrong Joe, she manages to see her right daughter and asks her to go back to her father, promising that she'll find a way to get back to the right universe. After that, the authorities arrest her on suspicion that she harmed her daughter. Well, the truth is much harder to explain. At the hospital, the right Alice has a dream in which Valia offers to take her to her mother. Upon waking up, she mentions to her father that they must save Joe. The woman is taken to a psychiatric facility run by Irina, where they treat so-called astronaut burnout away from the public eye. Now, with Henry's body, Bud listens to the Apollo 18 tape and discovers that in this reality Henry saved his crewmates and became a hero. Furious, he decides to destroy the CAL. For his part, Henry, trapped in Bud's body, is accused of the murder of Ian Rogers and the attempted murder of Paul. In this reality, Henry tries to prove his true identity with the lie detector and claims that all this chaos between realities began with the creation of Kiel. Even so, the authorities don't believe his version and end up convicting him of Bud's crimes. In the next scene, the mistaken Alice tries to explain to her father that their real Joe died in space, and the one in their universe is the wrong one. Of course, Magnus doesn't understand her words and mentions that Joe is getting special treatment. At the psychiatric center, Irina informs Joe that she is pregnant and therefore they cannot prescribe lithium, as it would harm the fetus. Joe refuses to have another child, and for a few seconds she sees Irina as the Valya. When she gets a visit from Andreev, Joe explains her theory about swapping universes and points out that Irina went through the same thing. They both died in other universes. Andreev thinks she is suffering from astronaut burnout, though before leaving the room, he hands her some keys. In the evening, Irina invites Henry to dinner. The problem is, it's not Henry, but Bud, who reveals that he saved the Apollo 18 crewmen only for someone else to take the credit. Well, not anymore. At the same time, Joe tries to escape the psychiatric facility with the keys, though she runs into a couple of lunatic patients who make her return to her room. Eventually, the right Alice learns to accept that her mother is in another universe with another Alice, so she moves on with her life alongside her father. The next day, Joe asks Irina about the patient she saw. The director explains that he's just one man and supposedly the first human in space. Then, Irina confesses that she went through the same thing Joe did, and unfortunately, there is no solution. There is no way to return to their respective universes. So, Irina motivates her to accept her new reality, to go back to her family and wait for her future baby. Thanks to this, Joe and the wrong Alice begin to form a mother-daughter bond. She also tells Magnus that she wants to take the lithium pills, but he changes her mind and convinces her to have the baby. While Joe packs her things to go home, Irina approaches Alice and whispers that her friends call her Valya. Then the girl asks her mother what universe the baby will be from. During Joe's explanation, we travel to the other universe and see her corpse floating in the ISS until she wakes up. What an end to the season. So many open questions remain, like, what will become of Paul in the wrong universe, and how did the other Joe survive the ISS incident? More than that, how will she return to Earth? Unfortunately, we can only answer these questions in our imagination, as Apple TV decided to cancel the show. A real shame, but at least we had a wonderful time trying to sort out the universal chaos.